Welcome back to episode 2 of New Levels Coaching, Coach's Corner. This week is all about running to feel. So before we look at the importance of running to feel, firstly, we've got to look at, well, what is it? Running to feel is very much running to the feel of your body and understanding the effort that you're putting in without the help of something like your Garmin watch or constantly looking at that watch or other things that could potentially be helping you, statistics, data that ultimately we become a little bit wrapped up in these days. So running to feel is learning to listen to your body, understanding the body and understanding the effort levels that you're putting in, whether that's an easy run, steady run, whether it's you're in an interval session, or whether it's that you're doing a race and you want to challenge yourself to run without the watch. But as we know, many marathon runners will understand this. When we get to big city races in particular, races that are crowded, they involve a lot of people, we can lose satellite on the watch. And that can affect us because you start seeing paces that aren't a true reflection of the pace you're actually running. What's happened is as these watches and data and technology has become a lot more advanced, we've become a lot more reliant on it. But it doesn't mean it's always accurate, whether that's in training or whether that's in the races themselves. And if you're heading out onto the trails and in the trees and in the forest and places like that, there's a good chance you're not getting any signal at all. So it really comes back to how do you know the effort you're putting in and how do you know that correlates to the pace that you're aiming to run for whether it's a marathon, a half marathon, a 10K, or whether it's on the trails and you're looking to do an ultra. So with that in mind, how do you get good at running to feel? Well, for me, it all comes down to practice. And in this video, I've put my skills to the test by practicing this in a track session. Now, the aim of the track session was to go to the track and I didn't have any expectations on, looking at what scientific benefit I wanted from the session. What energy systems do I want to hit? How fast do I want to do all of these reps? Do I run myself into the ground? Do I end up on my hands and knees at the end of the session so I'm absolutely knackered? No. The purpose of this session was very simple, to try and get used to running to feel. So I set myself a little pace target of around 75 to 72 seconds per 400 meters. I was taking 45 seconds standing recovery, turning back around and repeating it. And I was going to aim to do 16 reps. I guess the other purpose of the session was to see if I could, 1, lock into that pace, but 2, could I get gradually faster throughout the session by controlling that pace to start off with. So the key to this is accepting that the first one might not be bang on, but it should be in a kind of a ballpark area. And I don't mind personally as a coach, if that's a little bit slower, I would rather be a little bit slower than a little bit faster. The reason for that, I'm going to go black and white here, is just simply because I just like to warm up into that session. And sometimes if you go too hard, you just spike everything and then you end up feeling rubbish throughout the rest of the session. There's a kind of a key saying a lot amongst the elite athletes, and sometimes they do a primer before a session. And what a primer is, it helps to prime the system ready for that first rep, because it's almost known as first rep syndrome. You feel a little bit rubbish in that first rep. So like I say, don't be scared just to allow yourself to warm into the session, get into it naturally. And as you start to warm up and the body gets a little bit more supple and you start to get a little bit more relaxed, you find your rhythm, naturally that pace will pick up. So how did the session look for me? Well, thankfully, it was quite a good session, but I did set off in control. I'll share my splits, but the idea was to give myself a little bit of control, a little bit of awareness early on. So just to control things, gave myself a range of like 75, 72, set off a little bit slower than that, 77 just to find the legs, 75 by the next one. And actually, by the end of the session, I was down to 67, which is quite nice, 10 seconds faster than I started the first rep. So it just shows you control things. You can really make the most of your sessions. And as you can see from the stats from Strava, and hopefully those lap splits are showing up, whether that's Strava or Garmin, wherever you're getting your data from, that I started around 77 seconds, which is a couple of seconds outside my target pace. But by rep number 2, I was banging that zone from 72 to 75. So I was allowing myself a little bit of a window and I was running completely to feel here. So I got my feel in my first rep, then I locked in, I was just running to feel. And the only split that I looked at every now and again was 200 meters just to see if my feel was correct. And I just looked at it, not to dictate my pace and my effort, just for a little bit of reassurance that, yep, that feels about right. And it is about right. As the session progressed, I was feeling good. And I would say this, if you're in a session, you are feeling good, don't be afraid to then push on. So I then pushed on a little bit. I didn't ever go out of control. I finished down at 67 seconds for my last 400, which is 10 seconds faster than the first rep. And it didn't feel a whole lot different. Yes, I was maybe running a little bit quicker. Obviously, the stats show that. But in terms of running to feel, I didn't feel like I was putting in a lot more effort than I was from rep 1 to rep 2. So how do we get good at running to feel? Well, it does ultimately, like I say, come down to practice. You've got to practice this time and time again. Personally, I love to go out for runs and not look at my watch. I see this a lot and it bugs me as a coach. I go out driving in the car and I'll see runners and they're constantly just looking at their watch all the time. People even had pace reminder beeps on these days. And that's great if they're using that to help you as a tool. But what are you going to do if that watch isn't working, that satellite's incorrect? You've got to learn your body. There was a research study done and that tested athletes, I guess, their perception of effort in relation to their pace. And it was all done with the RPE scale, the rate of perceived exertion. And what it showed and what it demonstrated is that we are very intuitive. We understand that pace we're putting in. But the people who were better at that and understanding the effort level that they were at were the people who practiced it. You may be familiar or unfamiliar with the term naked running. Now, I'm not going to ask you to take off your clothes, but what I am saying is don't be afraid to run without the watch. It's become a term that some athletes are familiar with, and it just means taking the watch out of the equation, going out for a naked run. So that means no watch on the wrist and just running to feel. Another good way to do that is to run to time, not to a set distance, because then you're not chasing the splits. Go out for, say, 30-minute run, 40-minute run, and just keep it easy. But the last tip from me is understanding the purpose of that run or that session. And that comes back to the track session that I did today. If it's an easy run, go out and run easy and use your RPE scale to help you. We did a brilliant podcast recently with a physiologist, Dave Sheldon, who works at New Levels Coaching. I would recommend you go and listen to that. It's on YouTube. It's on all the major podcast platforms. You can go and listen to that. And we talk a lot about what does that effort look like and what are those different training zones that you should be training in. But ultimately, like a lot of things, it comes back down to practice. So don't be afraid to go out and test yourself without becoming obsessed over the watch. It will help you in races. It will help you with your pacing. And I promise you, once you get used to it, you will see some better results. So that's all for episode 2. I hope you found that useful. Don't be afraid to go out the door without the watch. Don't be afraid to challenge yourself just to turn those splits off and try to get used to running to feel.